This is TWiT.
Google's giving data to police based on search keywords.
Oh, crap.
So this, though, is interesting because they're not doing it on the individual level. Now police are asking, they're issuing warrants, where they ask Google to disclose everyone who has searched for a particular keyword. So
like fertilizer bomb or something?
Yeah, so it's the inverse of like, I suspect Stacey. Let's see what she searched for. Like, let's say they think I murdered
but this is a
someone with
phishing
hatchet.
expedition. So
yeah,
in
that's
this,
what librarians refuse to do.
So, they're asking for it.
and they're getting it, apparently.
Yeah.
So, for instance, they have an example in this CNET article. The police in Florida sent a search warrant to Google that said, we want to see users who had searched for a particular address near where an arson happened. So somebody typed in an address, and they got back everybody who searched for that address. Now, I don't know. It feels like, to me, that would have pulled in a lot of innocent people. In fact, mostly innocent people. They did, in fact, arrest somebody for setting fire to a witness's car. I don't know if I like that, but
if they had a librarian working for them, the librarian would have told them, you don't do that.
You can't go to the library and say, hey, can you tell me everybody who used your computers and searched for fertilizer bomb? Yeah. And maybe they can now, though. That's the point.
So, but what I found interesting is that in New York, they've actually proposed legislation to make this illegal. So I'm like, go to New York. I mean, obviously it's not passed. And we're probably going to see some state-by-state and not enforcement rules around this, which could be confusing. And then maybe Google will be like, dang it, let's figure out something we can do federally.
Credit to a reporter for Detroit News, Robert Snell, who found the unsealed court filing on Tuesday and tweeted about it. Google provided the IP addresses of people who searched for the arson victim's address. They then tied one of the IP addresses to a phone number belonging to the suspect. They then used phone number records to pinpoint the location of his device using, that's one of those pen warrants where you could say, hey, where was this guy on the night of? And
they did use this to like get a person.
They arrested him. Yep.
Yeah. So this is very much, his digital footprint getting him in trouble. I mean, actually, let me rephrase that. Arson got him in trouble.
Yeah. But he got caught because of his digital footprint.
Yeah.
Google has declined to say how many keyword warrants they've received in the past 3 years. But they did say that they work to protect the privacy of their users, but they have to support law enforcement. Quote, this is Google's Director of Law Enforcement and Information Security, Richard Salgado. We require a warrant and push to narrow the scope of these particular demands when overly broad, including by objecting in court when appropriate. These data demands represent less than 1% of total warrants and a small fraction of the overall legal demands for user data that we currently receive. That's a really interesting policing technique. I'm not necessarily against it. I mean, they caught the guy.
Yeah, but I mean, the question then becomes like, how broad could those? So searching for that particular person's address, I can imagine.
That's a pretty narrow search, right?
Well, it doesn't have to be. Let's say it's COVID, but let's say I was throwing a party and lots of people were searching for my address. Mm-hmm. I mean, yes, they could argue, well, she was throwing a party. I wanted to figure out, and that would presumably absolve them. But I don't know. And sometimes I search for addresses. Like when we were buying a house, I was searching for addresses all the time so I could see the house on Street View. I don't know. I mean, it's not. It depends on the search. It depends on. And anytime you get caught up in one of these, I guess the thing to ask is, if you get caught up in something like this, what happens to you as a citizen? What is the burden put upon you to prove your innocence?
Right.
Because make no mistake that you are proving your innocence in this case. So do you have to hire a lawyer? Because that's a pretty high hurdle to jump over. So I think we should ask ourselves things like that when we're trying to figure out if this is good or not.
Well, I would say in a case like this where it's a very specific search and probably came up with one or maybe a couple of people searching for that address. That's a very specific search. And that's more useful to the police. They could probably eliminate some of the people by saying, well, that's the guy who lives there. That's a friend who came over. But who's this? And that doesn't mean that they necessarily banged on every door and with a warrant and said, we're taking you downtown for questioning. It's part of an overall picture that they're painting. I have a little less problem with that than if they search for a fertilizer bomb, which might produce, a eighth grader as well as, a bad guy. The more narrow, I think, the better, right? Would you agree with that, Stacey?
That is true. And as someone who is I have Googled various money laundering techniques that I learn about on books or television. I'm like, is that real? Let's see. I'm like, yes.
I Google crimes all the time. Doesn't mean I'm going to commit them.
Yeah. I just don't want my search to make me guilty.
Right.
Just because I'm searching for something.
Right.
Anyway, I thought y'all'd appreciate that story.
No, I do.
Yep.
EFF Surveillance Litigation Director Jennifer Lynch said, if Google stored data in a way that was truly de-identified, they couldn't do these kinds of...
Yeah. And I wrote about that. I think that story's out now, but I wrote about that for IEEE, my column in that. And that was all about privacy by design. And basically, if you're going to gather lots of potentially intrusive data, you must separate it completely from identifying characteristics.
So Google does not do that. But somebody like DuckDuckGo, that's their selling point, right? We de-identify. We don't know who you are. I hope that's true.
Is that where you're doing your fertilizer bomb searches?
It's more like weird sexual practices, but I'm not. Don't be judging me. But no, seriously, I think that would be a very good argument for not using Google for searches, but instead using something that That doesn't mean that they don't have to work well, but why are they tracking who searches for what? Why are they keeping that information? Well, obviously, they're keeping it so they can ads, right?
The better to serve you ads.
Yeah. So that's a very good argument for DuckDuckGo, for instance.
Or incognito mode. Just throwing that out there.
No. That's, by the way, no. Incognito mode does not hide you from Google. It only doesn't save cookies on your browser. Google still knows who made the search. It still ties your IP address to that search.
There's a public service for everybody.
Yeah. Incognito mode does not protect your privacy that way. I honestly think that's now that you mention this is a very strong case for I've kind of been looking for something beyond. I don't care if they targets ads against me. That's actually a benefit to me. But if that data is also used, for instance, in a phishing warrant by law enforcement, that's problematic, don't you think?
Anything you want to tell us about, Leo?
No. That is, by the way, why many browsers, Firefox offers this, allow you to do. Well, actually, this wouldn't protect you, would it? Would DNS over HTTPS? No. It wouldn't protect you because you're going to Google and saying, tell me something. Google knows your IP address. A VPN would protect you. Yes, it would anonymize you. That's a good reason to use a VPN. The IP address associated with that would be the VPN's, not yours. Again, why it's very important to choose a VPN that does not log. If you could go to the VPN and say, hey, who was making that search? And they could say, well, Leo was using that IP address at that time. That would not be good. I'm not trying to undermine police. This looks like an interesting investigative tool. I worry about overly broad phishing searches. So good. Yeah, really good story.